When country superstar Blake Shelton finally opened up about his recovery journey, the world wasn't ready for what he had to say. For years, fans have seen him as the laid-back cowboy with a quick joke, a big smile, and a heart full of music. But behind that easy charm was a man fighting a private battle, one that nearly changed everything. In a moment of raw honesty, Blake decided to speak about what really happened, the pain, the lessons, and the quiet strength it took to find his way back. What started as whispers about his health soon became one of the most emotional stories in country music. This wasn't just about sickness or recovery. It was about faith, love, and rediscovering purpose when life forces you to slow down. And as Blake began to open up, fans around the world saw a different side of him, real, vulnerable, and more inspiring than ever before. But how did it all begin? The answer lies in the quiet moments before the storm. It all started quietly, almost too quietly for anyone to notice. Blake Shelton, the man who could light up any stage with his voice and humor, began feeling off. At first it was nothing dramatic, just fatigue, a bit of joint pain and waves of weakness that came and went. Friends and crew members brushed it off, saying it was probably exhaustion from his non-stop schedule. So after all, Blake had been performing, recording, filming The Voice, and juggling life as one of the busiest artists in the business. Who wouldn't feel worn out? But deep down, Blake knew this wasn't normal. The long nights started taking a toll. Simple things like rehearsing for a show or walking onto the stage began to feel heavier than before. There were moments when he'd stop mid-song, pressing a hand to his side, taking a slow breath before forcing a smile, and carrying on as if nothing had happened. People close to him say he was determined to push through, just like he always had. He'd tell jokes, sip his coffee, and say, "I'm fine, y'all. Just tired." But the truth was, his body was giving him warnings, and as time passed, those small signs turned into something he couldn't ignore anymore. Because what started as simple tiredness was about to turn into the hardest fight of his life. What began as quiet discomfort soon became impossible to ignore. During rehearsals, Blake would sometimes pause mid-performance, clutching his side or taking deep breaths before finishing a song. Crew members exchanged worried looks, but Blake, always the professional, would laugh it off. "Guess I'm just getting old," he'd joke. But everyone could see that something wasn't right. Behind the scenes, Gwen Stefani and close friends urged him to get checked out. Blake resisted at first. He wasn't the kind of man who liked hospitals or doctors. He'd been raised on grit and resilience, believing that a little pain was just part of the job. But this time the pain wasn't backing down. Finally, after weeks of worsening fatigue and discomfort, he agreed to see a specialist. What doctors discovered, according to those close to the family, was more serious than anyone expected. They advised him to take immediate rest and undergo treatment. The exact details weren't made public, but sources described it as a lingering health issue that had quietly developed over time, one that demanded both physical recovery and emotional healing. Blake later admitted in a rare interview, "I kept thinking I could just push through it. That's what I've always done. You play the shows, smile for the camera, and keep going. But this time my body said, no more." When the news broke that Blake had been hospitalized for observation, fans around the world were shocked. Within hours, hashtags like "Pray for Blake" and "Stay Strong Shelton" flooded social media. Messages of love, support, and prayer poured in from every corner of the world, proof of just how deeply fans cared for the man behind the music. But while the world was praying, something powerful was happening behind closed doors, something that would change Blake's perspective forever. Because when life brings you to your knees, you find out who really stands beside you. And for Blake, that person was Gwen Stefani. When the news first broke that Blake Shelton had been hospitalized, the music world froze. Fans who were used to seeing him joking around on The Voice or performing on stage with his usual spark suddenly found themselves praying for answers. The headlines were cautious, but the concern was real. What had really happened to country music's golden heart? Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was quieter, more fragile. Blake wasn't just there for a quick checkup. Doctors wanted to observe his condition closely, making sure whatever had been draining his strength didn't turn into something worse. For someone who had spent decades living in the spotlight, those hospital walls felt like a different kind of stage, one where there were no cameras, no fans, just uncertainty. Friends say Blake struggled at first. He wasn't used to being still. He wanted to get up, move around, crack jokes with the nurses, and tell everyone he'd be fine. But the truth was, he wasn't sure. His voice, his laughter, even his energy, all of it seemed distant. Meanwhile, outside those hospital doors, fans rallied together in a wave of compassion. Country radio stations played his songs non-stop in tribute. Churches across Oklahoma held prayer circles. Social media overflowed with heartfelt messages. One fan wrote, "Blake has given us so much joy for years, now it's our turn to lift him up." But perhaps the most moving show of support came from one person, Gwen Stefani. As reports began circulating, people wondered how she was coping. What they didn't see was the quiet strength she carried behind the scenes. Because while millions prayed for Blake, Gwen was already there, holding his hand, whispering encouragement, and refusing to leave his side. And that's where this story takes a turn, from fear to faith, from sickness to something far more powerful, love. Through every test, every long night, and every quiet moment of uncertainty, one person never left his side, Gwen Stefani. The world has always admired their love story, two stars from completely different worlds who found each other in the chaos of fame. But this chapter of their life revealed a kind of love that went beyond romance. It was loyalty, faith, and unwavering devotion. Sources close to the couple say Gwen was by his hospital bed day and night, holding his hand, talking to him softly and keeping his spirits alive. Even when the doctor's updates were cautious, Gwen never wavered. "She was his rock," said one family friend. Even when things looked uncertain, she smiled, prayed, and told him he'd get through it. Blake later opened up about what that support meant to him. His voice cracked as he recalled those moments. "You think you know what love is," he said, "until someone sits beside your bed for days just to make sure you're okay." Gwen showed me what real love looks like. I owe a lot of my strength to her. Fans were moved to tears when Gwen posted a short message on social media. "God is so good. Watching Blake heal and fight his way back has been the most inspiring thing ever. We're grateful for every prayer and every message from fans." The post instantly went viral, millions of likes, thousands of comments, and an outpouring of support from fans who saw the couple's bond as something truly rare. But for Blake, this wasn't just about recovering physically. It was about realizing the power of love, the kind that stays when everything else feels uncertain. And as his strength began to return, Blake discovered something else too, that healing isn't just about medicine or rest. It's about the people who remind you why life is worth fighting for. But even with Gwen by his side, the road ahead wasn't easy. Because when he finally left the hospital, the hardest part was only beginning, the recovery. Leaving the hospital felt like freedom. But for Blake Shelton, it was only the beginning of a new kind of battle. The kind that tests patience more than strength. Recovery wasn't glamorous. There were no bright lights, no cheering crowds, just quiet mornings filled with doctor visits, therapy sessions, and long stretches of rest. For someone who had spent decades performing for packed arenas, being forced to slow down felt like torture. Blake had to cancel several shows, something that broke his heart. He's always been the kind of artist who treats every performance like a promise to his fans. "I hate letting people down," he admitted in one interview. "Every time I cancel a show, I feel like I'm breaking a promise. But I had to learn that sometimes taking care of yourself is the most important promise you can keep." Those who were close to him during that time say that even in pain, Blake never lost his humor. He'd joke with the nurses, tease the staff, and keep the mood light even when the exhaustion hit hard. One nurse shared, "He'd always make us laugh. You could tell he was hurting, but he still wanted to make everyone around him smile." But when the cameras were off and the room went quiet, Blake began to confront something deeper, who he was beyond the music. The long days of rest forced him to think about his life, his purpose, and what really mattered. "I had to slow down and listen," he said softly. "I started praying more. I started thinking about life beyond the spotlight. The simple things, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, being grateful to just be alive." This period of recovery became more than physical healing. It was a spiritual reset. Blake began to see the value in silence, the power in stillness, and the grace in gratitude. But what he didn't expect was how deeply his story would touch others once he decided to share it. Because when Blake finally spoke publicly about what he'd been through, The response from fans was overwhelming and emotional, and that moment would prove that sometimes vulnerability is the most powerful form of strength. As Blake Shelton's body began to heal, something inside him changed too. The man who once measured his life by chart-topping hits and sold-out shows started finding peace in the quiet moments, the ones most people overlook. He began to spend more time at home in Oklahoma, surrounded by open fields, sunsets, and the simple sound of wind through the trees. Friends say that during those quiet days, Blake rediscovered something he hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Gratitude for life, for love, and for the people who stood by him when things got dark. It was during this time that music came calling again, but this time it wasn't about fame or pressure, it was about healing. Blake started writing new songs, pouring his emotions into every lyric. According to insiders from his label, he's been working on deeply personal material, songs inspired by recovery. Faith and Rebirth, one rumored track, Back to the Heart, reportedly reflects on his journey from exhaustion to renewal. Those who've heard early previews describe it as one of his most emotional songs ever, raw, stripped down and full of soul. Blake hinted at this shift in a recent interview, saying, I'm writing from a place of truth now. I've been through fire and came out stronger. Music helped me heal, and I hope it helps others too, but it's not just about the music. Blake has also been planning a special thank you tour, not a flashy arena spectacle, but a series of small, intimate shows meant to honor the fans who stood by him. He wants to perform in towns that supported him from the start, the kind of places that remind him of where he came from. Those close to him say this is the happiest and most grounded he's been in years. It's as if the pain gave him a new purpose, a chance to reconnect with his roots, his faith, and his fans in a way that feels real and lasting. But what touched people the most wasn't just the comeback. It was how open and vulnerable Blake had become. When he finally shared his recovery story publicly, fans saw a side of him they'd never seen before, and what happened next showed just how deeply his honesty resonated with the world. When Blake Shelton finally shared his recovery story with the world, fans were completely unprepared for the wave of emotion that followed. For years they'd seen him as the funny, confident cowboy, the guy who made everyone laugh on The Voice and never seemed to have a bad day. But now they were hearing the truth behind that smile. And it broke hearts in the best possible way. Social media lit up the moment Blake's heartfelt video went live. Fans flooded the comments with love, gratitude, and tears. One wrote, "I've loved Blake since day one, but hearing him speak so openly made me cry. He's more than a singer, he's a fighter." Another shared, "We all go through tough times, but seeing someone like Blake be so real gives me hope." Within hours, hashtags like "One Blake Strong" and "One Shelton Heals" were trending across platforms. But it wasn't just about fandom. It became a movement of shared healing. People began telling their own stories of struggle, loss, and recovery, inspired by Blake's courage to speak up. Blake later admitted he was overwhelmed by the response. He said, "If my story makes even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it. I never imagined my hardest season could become a reason for someone else to keep going." That moment marked a powerful turning point in his career. Blake wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He had become a symbol of resilience. His vulnerability connected people in a way his music alone never could. And as fans continued to send letters, artwork, and stories of how his words helped them, Blake realized something beautiful: that healing doesn't stop with you. It spreads, it multiplies. It creates hope for others who need it most. But even after the applause faded and the headlines moved on, Blake's journey didn't end there. Because what he discovered through pain and recovery would shape not just his music, but his entire outlook on life. And that's where his story takes its most inspiring turn yet. A lesson about faith, family, and finding purpose again. For Blake Shelton, recovery wasn't just about getting healthy again. It became a spiritual awakening, a moment that redefined what truly mattered in his life. Those close to him say that during his quietest days of healing, Blake turned to faith more than ever before. Early mornings that once began with tour calls and interviews were replaced by stillness, a cup of coffee, a Bible by his side, and moments of prayer that grounded him. He started to see life through a new lens, one that valued peace over pressure and purpose over perfection. "When you're forced to stop," Blake said in one candid interview, You start to notice the beauty in the little things. A call from a friend, a song on the radio, the sound of Gwen laughing. It's all grace. That grace became his compass. Instead of chasing the next big stage, Blake began spending more time at his Oklahoma ranch, tending to the land, working alongside family, and reconnecting with his roots. The dirt, the still air, the rhythm of country life, it reminded him who he was long before the fame. The best medicine, he smiled, is being home, being surrounded by love, dirt, and music. And for Gwen, this new chapter was a blessing too. She once said that watching Blake heal restored her own faith, proof that sometimes love doesn't just help you survive, it helps you grow. Today, Blake stands as a man transformed, physically stronger, emotionally grounded, and spiritually renewed. He's using his story not to draw sympathy, but to remind others that strength isn't about never falling, it's about standing back up every single time you do. In one of his most heartfelt public moments, Blake faced his audience, his voice trembling slightly, and said, "I'm here today because of my family, my friends, and my fans. You guys prayed for me, sent love, and lifted me up when I couldn't lift myself. I'll never forget that." The crowd fell silent, many in tears, not because they were seeing a superstar, but because they were seeing something even rarer. A man who had walked through pain and come out with purpose, and as he strummed his guitar and smiled at the sea of faces before him, one thing was clear: this wasn't a comeback story. It was a rebirth. Blake Shelton's story is more than just another chapter in the world of country music. It's a testament to what happens when life forces you to slow down and truly listen. From the hospital walls that echoed with uncertainty to the open fields of his Oklahoma home where healing began, Blake's journey reminds us that even in the toughest seasons, there's always a reason to keep going. He's faced setbacks, fought through pain, and confronted the kind of silence that makes you question everything. But through it all, he found something even more powerful than fame: peace. The kind that comes from love, faith, and the people who never stopped believing in him. And maybe that's the real message behind it all, that life's hardest moments aren't punishments, but invitations. Invitations to rediscover who we are, to reconnect with what truly matters, and to rise again stronger than before. So as Blake Shelton continues his next chapter, whether on stage, at home with Gwen, or out in the quiet of his ranch, one thing is certain: the man who once sang about heartbreak and whiskey now sings about hope and home. Because sometimes the greatest comeback isn't about returning to the spotlight. It's about finding your light again,